Hello, Algebra 1. Today we're going to talk about solving by square roots. And now we've talked about quadratics, we've been talking about finding the solutions of quadratics, and now we have some special cases just like we did whenever we were talking about factoring. So when we have square roots, y'all have noticed this x squared has been pretty present in everything that we've done thus far, and that's great. So now when we talk about solving by square roots, we want to get it to where the problem says that did not work out the way I wanted it to. The problem says x squared. We want it to start to say x squared equals so that we can get a solution. So here they've taken x squared. They've said, okay, we know the square root of x squared is just x, and we're going to get two solutions by solving taking the square root of x. We're going to get x equals, and here they have plus or minus. And that plus or minus is very important because that means we have two factors. We have a positive factor and we have a negative factor. Think about when we talk about like the square root of 49. Most of you guys would say that that's just 7, but it's actually positive 7 and negative 7 because negative 7 times negative 7 is also going to give us 49. So remember that this plus or minus is very important. Sometimes, for like example right here, 15, well that's an irrational number. The square root of 15 is a decimal that we do not want to write down because it's entirely too large for us. It goes on forever. So we say plus or minus the square root of 15. We'll have some really good examples in this video that will help you guys out. Let's start out with an easy one here. We've got x squared plus 169. Well, I want to know what my roots are or what my zeros are, so I want to know what x equals. If I want to know what x equals, I have to take the square root of x squared, and I have to take the square root of 169. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 169 is plus or minus 13. So what's my solution? Positive 13 and negative 13, or you could just write it as x equals plus or minus 13. All right, we have another fairly simple example, but there's a trick here. I notice immediately that I have this negative 49. That says something to me. So I'm going to take the square root of x squared. I'm going to try to take the square root of negative 49. What number, when multiplied by itself, is going to give me negative 49? Negative 7 times negative 7 is positive 49. 7 times 7 is positive 49. This cannot be done. This is, how do we say this? No, did we say no real solutions? So if you think about what that would look like on your calculator, you're thinking right now to yourself, solutions. Sorry, I can't talk to you guys and write this down, but that would be a graph that doesn't cross the x-axis. It's either all the way above or it's all the way below. Here is another example. Now I'm seeing that it's set equal to 0, and remember, what am I trying to get by itself here? I want to get x squared by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 49 to each side. So I'm left with 16x squared is equal to 49. I'm going to get x squared by itself, so I'm going to divide everybody by 16. X squared is equal to 49 over 16. Okay, a lot of you are going to want to make that a decimal. Let's not make it a decimal. Let's leave it as a fraction because this happens to work out in our favor because 49 is a perfect square and 16 is a perfect square. If I take the square root of x squared, it's going to give me x. And this will be the first time that you guys are seeing this. So the square root of 49 over 16 is the square root of 7 times 7 over 4 times 4. Well, what's the square root of 7 times 7 is 7. The square root of 4 times 4 is 4. This reduces down beautifully to a nice fraction, 7/4. Now, I forgot something very important here. Can you think of what it is? It's my plus or minus. I'm talking about the positive and the negative. So my two zeros here are x equals positive 7/4 and negative 7/4.
Okay, let's look at these two. If you want to, you could pause the video right now and try them on your own and then play it back and see if you get them right. So here, I'm wanting to get x squared alone. So I take my problem, 100x squared plus 49 equals 0. I need to get x squared alone, so I subtract 49 to each side, which leaves me 100x squared equals negative 49. Now, I already am starting to doubt that this may work because of that negative. When I divide by 100, I get x squared equals negative 49 over 100. Now I need to take the square root of each side to get x alone. Well, here we go. Just as I predicted, I cannot take the square root of a negative number. So this answer right here would be no real solutions. All right, let's look at the next one. 36x squared equals 1. This is almost x squared alone. I just need to do one thing, that is divide each side by 36. So I get x squared equals 1 over 36. I notice 1's a perfect square and 36 is a perfect square. So that's good when I'm taking square roots. When I take the square root of each side, the square root of x squared is x. The square root, remember how I can rewrite this, guys? The square root of 1 over the square root of 36. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 36 is 6. And then I have to remember my ever so important plus or minus. So my two solutions to this would be x equals positive 1/6 and x equals negative 1/6. Those are the solutions to this quadratic. Okay? X squared equals 15. I think this is the same one on the example. It sure was. X equals plus or minus the square root of 15 is my answer. When I look at the next problem, I'm going to subtract 90 to each side. So I get negative 3x squared equals negative 90. Now I need to divide by negative 3. Remember, we're trying to get x squared alone. So I get x squared equals positive 30. Now to get x out of from x squared, I take the square root of each side. So I get x equals, when I take the square root of a number, I end up with two answers, the positive version and the negative version. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 30. We do not know the square root of 30. It's not a perfect square, so we leave our answer as that. Here's our last problem. Mrs. Graves is building a retaining wall along one of the sides of her rectangular garden. When I see those words, I just think I need to start drawing a picture. The garden is twice as long as it is wide. So if my width is W and my length is twice that, this is 2W. It also has an area of 578 square feet. I'm labeling my picture as I go. What will be the length of the retaining wall? So I know the area is 578, and I know the area is made up from length times width. So that's W times 2W. W times 2W is 2W squared is going to be that. So I take 2W squared equals 578. I'm going to divide each side by 2. And I'm going to get that W squared is going to equal 289. Now I'm going to solve that by taking the square root of each side. And so now I do, now we do the square root of 289, and we get the W equals plus or minus 17. Okay? Now, does it make sense to have a width of negative 17? Can you have a negative width in a garden retaining wall? Absolutely not. So even though these are my solutions, because this problem now has meaning, it has a word problem associated with it, something that we know cannot be a negative value, I know that the width has to be my positive 17 answer. But when I go back to the question, it says, what will the length be? The length was twice the width. So my length equals 2 times 17, which is 34 feet, would be what my length equals. So there's an application problem to solving using square roots.